Okay, now the recording is in progress, and I think now it's live streaming also on YouTube. Okay, welcome everybody to the 17th session of History of English Language and Literature. I am Aishwarya, and I'll just quickly take you through what we had discussed in the previous session. I'll start sharing my screen now. Okay, so my laptop is acting up a little bit tonight. I hope this class goes hassle-free. But anyways, just a little recap of what we had discussed in the previous session. I took you through a little background of the prose during the Elizabethan period, extending to the Jacobean period as well, because you know that the period is the Jacobean period is just, you know, it succeeds the Elizabethan period, and several of the writers who were writing during the Elizabethan period continued to write in the next period as well. So we went through some really important Elizabethan and Jacobean prose writers and their works. And we discussed Thomas Wilton's The Art of Rhetoric, 1553, which was actually, one of the earliest treatises on English rhetoric. And then Edward Hall's Union of the Two Noble and Illustrious Families of Lancaster and York. And it was also, I mentioned that it was also the source of many of historical plays that were composed by Shakespeare and even Marlowe, right? So these sources, then these prose works then are important. And then we had a little discussion on Raphael Holinshed's Chronicles, and the Chronicles, the entire title being Holinshed's Chronicles of England, Scotland, and Ireland, which was actually a collaborative work that came out in 1577, and how this work it actually inspired Christopher Marlowe, Edmund Spenser, and other writers like George Daniel. And then Walter Raleigh's The History of the World, Thomas Nash's The Unfortunate Traveller or the Life of Jack Wilton. This is an important text. Why? Because it is a forerunner of the novel form. The novel form is yet to come in time, right? So it is a forerunner because it writes about, it is very autobiographical in nature, and it writes, it relates to all, the details of the author's life in a prose format, right? So even novel is what? It's written in prose style. And so, you know, this text is important because then it in a way, it is anticipating a genre that is only to come in the future, right? And it is often asked in competitive examinations as well. So you need to take note of that. And then we discussed Richard Hakluyt's The Principal Navigations, Voyages, Traffics, and Discoveries of English Nation, which was, again, a very important text because it aided many people in expeditions, and several new places around the world were discovered. And then we had discussed Samuel Purchas's Pilgrimage, and how this is an important text. Why? Because it inspired a romantic writer, very important romantic writer, S.T. Coleridge, in his work Kubla Khan, right? So how, you know, these texts, these different writers at different points of time, they were going back in time, and you know, these texts were then becoming great sources, great inspirations for their works. Then Richard Hooker's Of the Laws of Ecclesiastical Polity, and I did mention how turbulent the socio-economic, religious, even religious life was back in Elizabeth's time, that continued, you know, that unrest continued in the time that came after Elizabeth as well. King James I, who is also King James VI of Scotland, and then later Charles I, and then, you know, the interregnum came, and then Charles II, when he was restored to the throne. I'll go through all the historical details, but it was a very unstable period from religious point of view, from political point of view, because religion and politics were intertwined, they were enmeshed, right? So if you have to understand the politics of time. You have to also understand the religion of the time. You know how Church of England came into being with Henry VIII. He decided to break away from the Roman Catholic Church. All the details I have gone through in the previous sessions as well. So, it isn't, and because politics is so intertwined with the religious debates, the religious issues, it is imperative to take such texts for consideration. And whatever literature that was being composed back in that time, it deals with these religious and political issues. So this is then the base of what you will read from that time. The reason I am discussing these things at length with you guys. And then we had discussed Francis Bacon, father of empiricism, and I told you what empiricism is. Empiricism is when you arrive at something, when you arrive at some conclusions through observation. And how do you observe? You observe through your senses. So whenever, and this is also, the starting of scientific method, because this is exactly what you do in science as well. You observe through your senses, and whatever things are recurring, that is recorded, and then a universal truth is arrived at using all those observations. So this Baconian method, this scientific method, is actually used in science even today. And it was Francis Bacon who, in a way, who introduced this to the world. He was not just, he just did not contribute with his Baconian method. He was also, he had a very active court life. He was a courtier, and he was also a patron of libraries. So, whatever categorization and organization you find in libraries, this was actually, pioneered by Francis Bacon. So it is, he then becomes a very important figure for us to study, right? And he has come up with many important prose works, and one of them being The Advancement of Learning, that came out in 1605. And then Novum Organum, which is actually a philosophical work, and it is on logic and syllogism. And then The New Atlantis, it is actually a utopian novel, which was published posthumously, that is after his death in 1626. And it talks about a mythical island by the name of Bensalem. And the plot revolves around, a gradual unfolding of the island, its customs, but most importantly, its state-sponsored scientific institution. And that institution is called Salmon House. This is important. Right. And the experiments in this institution are conducted using the Baconian method, what Bacon had introduced, to understand nature and to conquer nature and to apply the collected knowledge for the betterment of society. So you are gathering knowledge, you are doing all the scientific work for the betterment, for the upliftment of the society. And it is very much in fashion. It is fashion around utopia, Thomas More's utopia. And though it is, indirectly criticized in this work, right? So The New Atlantis, and then how I told you how this work, New Atlantis, actually inspired the formation of the Royal Society that is operational even today, right? And then how Jonathan Swift parodied both Royal Society and New Atlantis in his book 3 of Gulliver's Travels. Right, the book 3 is concerns the voyage to Laputa, the floating island. If you have read this text, this is a text that we are going to come to at a future point. So for now, just remember this as a reference that New Atlantis and the Royal Society both have been criticized, have been parodied in Jonathan Swift's Gulliver's Travels, right? And then Bacon's essay. Bacon wrote almost on everything, from marriage, from companionship, whatever occurred to him, he wrote about it in his prose, his essays, and they're very popular. And the whole title of it is Essays, Religious Meditations, Places of Persuasion and Dissuasion, Seen and Allowed, 1597. And he kept adding to this collection throughout his life, right? Now, this was the point where we had stopped in the previous session. We are now taking up from there. So next important prose writer from that time is Sir Thomas Browne, and he composed this text, Religio Medici. Now, Religio Medici, this actually, it translates into the religion of a doctor. Now, if you see that religion and doctor, that is a representative of science, they are actually two disparate themes that are coming together in one title. So, it is actually a marriage of religion and science, which were actually being perceived as different. Some philosophers, some writers, some prose writers created distinctions between them. Like Francis Bacon, he came up with this distinction how religion is the word of God and how science is the work of God. And why did he do that? Because religion was embroiled in so much of controversy. There was so much of drama happening because of religion. So that was the period of so much of religious upheaval. So he wanted science to steer clear of all that controversy. So I think it was for that reason that he created this distinction. But what Thomas Browne does is he tries to reconcile the two, right? So this is a text by Sir Thomas Browne, and it is a spiritual testament and early psychological self-portrait. So you put religion, you put science, and you add psychology to the mix. You get Religio Medici, right? And it was published in 1643 after an unauthorized version was distributed the previous year. And this text was so popular, it became the European bestseller, and it brought instant fame to Sir Thomas Browne, both home and abroad, right? And it is actually about reconciliation of traditional opposites. Numinous, now the word numinous means something that concerns deity, right? Deity worship, when you worship idols and all. So idol worship, deities, and you are trying to reconcile religion and science, And throughout Religio Medici, Browne uses scientific imagery to illustrate religious truths as part of his discussion on the relationship of science to religion, a topic which has lost none of its contemporary relevance. We still are baffling with this whole idea. How to connect religion and science that actually appears so disparate, even more so after the emergence of Charles Darwin and his evolution theory, that we have all evolved, the human race has evolved from apes, which actually is in, it refutes what Bible, told. Bible was proclaiming since centuries that God made man in his own image, which led to a lot of unrest. But this unrest is still to come in future, because that is Victorian era. We're talking 1800 something, but for now we are in 1600s, right? And this attempt of reconciliating religion and science was being done by Sir Thomas Browne, right, during that Jacobean period. And it was also an appeal for toleration amidst the religious political upheavals. God's work and God's word are distinguished only to be reunited. So he acknowledges the distinction that was made by Bacon, that there is, science is God's work, and nature is God's work, and whatever scriptures you read, whatever Bible has to say is God's words. He is totally accepting whatever distinctions have been made, but what he does is he makes these distinctions only to connect them again, right? He says that no matter how disparate they sound, they continue to be bedfellows. So there is a marriage of religion and science in this text. Okay, so another important text by Sir Thomas Browne, Hydriotaphia. Now, hydriotaphia means urn burial. So, Hydriotaphia, urn burial, or a discourse of the sepulchral urns lately found in Norfolk, was published in 1658 as the first part of a two-part work that concludes with the Garden of Cyrus. So, Hydriotaphia was actually a precursor to the next work. So it's actually part one, and the part two is the Garden of Cyrus, right? And the title, the Hydriotaphia, it means urn burial, and its nominal subject was the discovery of some 40 to 50 Anglo-Saxon pots in Norfolk, that is a county in England. So, some 40 to 50 pots, Anglo-Saxon pots, were unearthed during that period. And Sir Thomas Browne wrote about it, right? And the discovery of these remains prompted Browne to deliver first a description of the antiques found. So, there's a vast description of what has been found. So, and then a survey of most of the burial and funerary customs, ancient and current, of which his era was aware, right? So whatever funeral customs, were prevalent during that time, and even during, and whatever had been continued through the Anglo-Saxon period, it talks about that. All the funerary customs and how dead bodies were buried and how the urns were preserved and whatever, right? An urn burial has been admired by Charles Lamb, Samuel Johnson, John Cowper, James Joyce, and so many other important figures in English literature. And you see John Cowper and Samuel Johnson, Charles Lamb, they are all forerunners of the Romantic period. And so, there was this renewed interest of how, with these pots being unearthed, there was a renewed interest in how, traveling back in history and trying to understand how things were done and how things are done now. And it is all a description of those customs and traditions, that are done to, say farewell to the dead ones, to the loved ones. So Edgar Allan Poe, a very important American English writer, quotes the urn burial at the beginning of the Murders of the Rue Morgue. So another important character from English literature, he quotes this text, quotes this prose work in his Murders in the Rue Morgue, right? That again is, it deals with the theme of death, right? So moving on, Robert Burton's Anatomy of Melancholy, another very important text. It was first published in 1621. The work was intended as a scientific examination of various distempers of the mind, to which Burton gives the honorific term melancholy. So, psychology was not a full-fledged discipline back in 1600s, but there were people who were writing about, various distempers of the mind, how, people could be in different moods at different points of time, and what could be the triggers, and what could be the traits of a person when he is experiencing melancholy, or if he is, feeling just the opposite of melancholy, he's jovial. And so even Robert Burton, he came up with this anatomy of melancholy to try to understand how melancholy operates. And it is actually a medical and psychological work in which all known knowledge on the subject would be presented. So whatever was known in Elizabethan Jacobean period in 1600s, whatever was known about psychology, you will find here in Robert Burton's Anatomy of Melancholy. So if you have an interest in psychology, and if you want to, go back in time and would want to know what different people have written about psychology, even before psychology had emerged as a full-fledged discipline in its own right. So, these are the texts that you could refer to. And it addresses the topic such as digestion, goblins, the geography of America, and others. And it to make it a valuable contribution to multiple research disciplines. So it doesn't just talk about psychology; it has several digressions where you would find discussions on I just spoke, digestion, goblins, and geography of America. Right. So this again is a very important work coming from that time. Now, I'll be sharing another screen, so we could take the discussion forward towards King James I's reign, and then how King James I was succeeded by Charles I, and under what circumstances was Charles I executed. Now, the execution of Charles I is the most infamous regicide in English history. So, before I take you through the details of what happened during Charles I's reign, let's quickly take a look at the timeline. Now, Queen Elizabeth I, she reigned from 1558 to 1603 till her death, right? Now, Queen Elizabeth I was succeeded by King James I, who was also King James VI of Scotland, right? So it's the same person. So he reigned England from 1603 to 1625 until his death. And he was succeeded by his son. His successor was King Charles I, who reigned from 1625 to 1649, right? And then after, King Charles I was executed, there briefly came a period of Commonwealth, the Commonwealth period or the interregnum, that is roughly from 1649 to 1660. And then King Charles II, the eldest son of King Charles I, was brought back to the throne of England in 1660. He was restored to the throne of England, and thus began the Restoration period. This is how we refer to his period in English literature, the Restoration period, because he was in exile after his father was executed. He had to be in exile for this period, 1649 to 1660. And he was traversing through France. He was going through, Netherlands, and he carried all those influences. When he was restored, he had carried all the influences of those lands where he was in exile. He brought it back to England, right? So it ushers in a completely different style of writing, ushers in a completely different handling of drama, to which we are going to come to at a later point. But for now, it is important for you to remember this timeline. Queen Elizabeth I, King James I, King Charles I, then Commonwealth period, and then King Charles II restored, right? And he stayed as the king of King Charles II. He stayed as he reigned from 1660 till 1685 till his death, right? So now, coming back to King James I's period. So before we advance into the discussion of this English Civil War, we first need to understand the socio-political conditions that were prevailing during King James I's rule in England. And as you see, that last Tudor monarch, that was Queen Elizabeth I, died in 1603. And, that was a time when England was, it had a sense, there was this overriding emotion of patriotic unity. But with her death, with the death of Queen Elizabeth I, that sentiment, that national sentiment was lost. You could see that fading away, even in the text that was being composed during that time, during that transition period from one monarch to another. And Queen Elizabeth I, she was an astute manager of men and the nation. She had managed everything so well, and English history in her under her rule is said to be the golden period, right? And she left no heirs. We know because she was a virgin queen and she did not have any issue. She left no heirs. She did not and she also did not act decisively against the Catholics who had remained in England. You know how there was a divide between the Anglicans and Catholics when a Church of England was formed, right? And she had not taken any decisive measure to tackle this divide between, the Roman Catholics and the Anglicans in her nation during her time. So, that issue remained unresolved. So, and that issue, it just got bigger with time. There was this period, King James the First's period, and the last years of Queen Elizabeth I was actually a time when England experienced a rise, of the landed gentry, and these landed, this landed gentry, the people from this, section of society, they had Puritan leanings, right? So Puritanism is also a Protestant Christian sect, right? Just like Anglicanism, but they wanted more purification. They were not happy with what Anglicans had settled, with whatever reforms they had settled in the church. They wanted the church to further get purified. And they were, in a way, you can call them extremists in a way, because they were, they were people who were following Bible word to word, no digressions whatsoever. I know a very strict adherence to whatever one would find in the Bible. These Puritans were the ones who had moved to New England as pilgrim fathers, and you know how strict they were with people. And if you have read Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter, it is a criticism of Puritanism. This whole puritanical control, puritanical America, right? So, and the people, these landed, the landed gentry that had emerged. Obviously, they were powerful. They had lands. So that powerful section of society that had newly emerged in England were having puritanical leanings, right? So, and with James the First, Stuart dynasty was established in England. So Queen Elizabeth I was Tudor dynasty, and with Queen Elizabeth I, Tudor dynasty came to an end, and then started the Stuart dynasty, right? And so King James I, he established Stuart dynasty in England, and he was the only son of Mary Stuart, Queen of Scots. Now, if you remember, Queen of Scots, Mary, Queen of Scots, was also contending against Queen Elizabeth I for the throne of England, right? And how she was executed on her command, on Queen Elizabeth I's command. So, they were not these two, Queen Elizabeth I and Mary of Scots, they were not very, obviously, they were not, they did not have good terms. And King James I was the only son of Mary, Mary Stuart, Queen of Scots. And I don't know, Queen Elizabeth I wouldn't have imagined that it would be her son who is going to come to throne after she dies. So King James I was a Protestant who was brought up in the Scottish court, which followed the manners of the French court. So, you would see some French influence entering into the English way of writing, some French fashion and style emerging in the English scene during this period. And, in 1589, he married the Protestant Anne of Denmark. So he married a Danish princess, and his visits to Denmark may have sparked an interest in witchcraft. And he became obsessed with the threat posed by witches, and he even persecuted them. So, he had even written, he had even composed a text named Demonology that came out in 1597, which opposed witchcraft and was also the source of Shakespeare's Macbeth, right? So, Shakespeare's Macbeth is also, a play which was written in honor of King James I and his Scottish lineage, right? So a lot of inspiration has been drawn up. The scene, the opening scene where witches are seen, three witches are seen. This could actually be, to purposefully, this could be something that was intentionally done by Shakespeare to bring up the themes that James the First was interested in, like witchcraft, and how towards the end it is the Scottish. It is all a Scottish text. It's all a Scottish play, right? So I don't know if most of you are aware with the details, but it is Banquo who, the lineage of Banquo, is then that becomes, the one, his son, he comes to the throne of Scotland towards the end of the play. So, and James the First is said to be from that line, that Scottish line, right? So it was all a dedication to King James the First. And he took anti-parliamentary decisions, and he took private decisions in foreign affairs. So he was a believer of, the divine right of the ruler, and that he had the final word. And he did not consider parliamentary decisions, the suggestions given by his council of ministers and all, and he often took decisions that were very private, that were taken single-handedly, and often he oppressed the Catholics and the Puritans. So he was an Anglican who oppressed the Catholics and the Puritans, and it was King James the First's time was also the time when colonies were established in North America and the West Indies, right? So this is also the time when you see, because these Puritans, they were being oppressed in England and even other parts of Europe, they were all migrating to this newfound land that was America. And the place where they migrated to, it came to be known as New England, right? And King James I was succeeded by Charles I. And, before we understand the whole controversy surrounding King Charles I, there is this one episode that we need to pay attention to. And this is something that fanned an Catholic sentiment in England, and it actually, it widened the gap between the Catholics and the Anglicans. So this was the gunpowder plot or the Jesuit treason in 1605. So it was a plan made by Catholics against King James I, right, to blow up the House of Lords on 5th November 1605. Now, 1603 is the time when King James I came to the throne, to the English throne. And within 2 years of him coming to the throne, this plot was concocted, was crafted, and it was an effort to end the persecution of Roman Catholics by the English government, right? I just mentioned how he was persecuting, how he was oppressing the Roman Catholics, and the Roman Catholic, some people from that section, the Roman Catholic section of the society, they got together to actually, they plotted together. They plotted to kill King James I. And Guy Fawkes Day, a bonfire night, is celebrated to condemn Fawkes, who was to execute the plot. So this Guy Fawkes, he was the one who was in charge of some explosives somewhere in the basement of the House of Lords, and he was supposed to blow it all up. but he was caught before that could happen, right? So Guy Fawkes was caught, and it is because this gunpowder plot was actually could not be executed. The reason why this becomes a night for celebration, because Guy Fawkes was caught, right? And the plot was revealed to the authorities through an anonymous letter. And during a search of the House of Lords in the evening on 4th of November, a day before it was, the whole plot had to be executed, a day before, in 1605, 4th November 1605, Fawkes was discovered guarding 36 barrels of gunpowder. So, it just reminds me of that scene. I don't know if you've seen Game of Thrones. There is this episode concerning Sept of Baelor and how it is blown off by Cersei. That is what, yeah, I think that is her name. Yeah. It reminds me of that. Had this plot been successful, it would have been the same. How, the whole place gets blown away, is totally on fire. And this is something that Guy Fawkes was planning that night, 5th November. On that day, 5th November 1605, but it could not be, executed. And people were saved. Guy Fawkes was caught, and that night then was celebrated as Bonfire Night. And anti-Catholic, after this incident, an anti-Catholic legislation was introduced after the plot's discovery, and many important and loyal Catholics retained high office during King James I's reign. But then, these Roman Catholics, they were oppressed further. And, like I said, there was this widened gap between the two, there was this widened gap between Anglicans and Roman Catholics now. And the thwarting of the gunpowder plot was commemorated for many years afterwards by special sermons and other public events, as the ringing of church bells, which evolved into the British variant of Bonfire Night today. So, the thing that we do, we sit around the fire, we call it a bonfire night. This actually is rooted in history. And this is the history behind Bonfire Night, right? So now you're more aware. And now, the English Civil War. So before I start discussing what happened with Charles I, remember there was this heightened, heightened anti-Catholic sentiment in England by this time, right? You need to remember this. And a little bit about the English Civil War, what exactly happened with Charles I. It's actually a long video. I think it's 14, 15 minutes. I'll just break it up for you so you understand, because it's a very important episode in the history of English literature. So I want you to pay attention.
Hi, I'm John Green, and this is Crash Course European History. So as we saw last week, absolutism was in the air during the 17th century, but not just in France. Across the English Channel, King James VI of Scotland became King James I of England after the death of the childless...
Just a moment. The screen just wouldn't appear.
Elizabeth in 1603, and he found himself thinking, I might not agree with those French Catholics about everything, but they are on to something when it comes to the divine right of kings to have absolute power. The inhabitants of the British Isles, however, weren't so sure. In fact, Protestant reformers were imagining a different idea of government. That's right, my friends, the constitutions are coming. So when he inherited the British throne, James aspired to unite his holdings in Wales, England, Scotland, and Ireland into a more cohesive whole. But of course, those regions, despite their geographic proximity, contain quite a lot of religious, ethnic, and economic diversity. Religiously, Calvinists, called Presbyterians in Scotland, Catholics, and Anglicans had big disagreements. Also, if you've ever been to a Scottish bar and accidentally said how much you're enjoying your visit to England, you will know that Scottish people are not English. True story, by the way, the entire bar went quiet all at once. It was really uncomfortable. And then I tried to fill that silence by saying, well, you have the same money, which also didn't go over great. James thought he could solve these problems by taking the title of King of Great Britain, one place, one king. He also had his officials institute English laws across all his kingdoms and promote adherence to Anglicanism, and he sought to keep the peace among Europe's great families by marrying his son Charles to Henrietta Maria, the Catholic sister of Francis Louis XIII. But that only ended up furthering divisions because Henrietta Maria refused to convert to Anglicanism and became a target for opponents from various factions. Henrietta Maria's husband, James.
So the first problem with Charles I, he had a Roman Catholic wife in the time when there was so much of heightened, this anti-Catholic sentiment was heightened in England, right? Number one.
His son Charles came to the throne in 1625, and he too firmly believed in the divine right of kings because, of course he did. He was backed by the nobility and about half of the gentry, or the wealthy landowners who were below the nobility, but other members of the gentry opposed the idea of absolutist monarchical power, as did many other less powerful people, including many farmers and much of the merchant classes who tended to live in cities. Those groups didn't have titles or ancient claims to land, but they were driving much of Britain's economy, and they felt that the elected English Parliament should have more power, because of course that would also mean that they had more power. In 1628, Charles bound to that parliamentary strength by agreeing to the Petition of Right, which said that the king could not raise taxes without Parliament's permission. But then he was like, I think I might have found a loophole, and he basically ghosted them. He simply stopped calling Parliament back into session, which of course infuriated Parliament and also felt like a rather blatant absolutist move from.
So what Charles I did, he was coming up with some very unpopular taxes, and he was not consulting the parliament because he was a believer of absolute power of the king, right? And he had the decision, he had the power, he believed that he had the power to take decisions without anybody's approval or suggestions. So he came up with some really unpopular taxes. His power was tried to contain through this Petition of Rights. That said that, he could not take decisions without consulting the parliament. But what he did not pay attention to what the parliament was saying. And he did not call the parliament for some 11 years. That was the reason why, people got, he became unpopular with the masses. Because obviously the people were not happy with, the heavy taxes that he had imposed. And also he was not taking into consideration the views and opinions of the parliament, right? So another important reason why he became unpopular, first was he already had a wife who, she refused to convert to Anglican faith, right? And she was Roman Catholic. And second was that he just wouldn't listen to anybody. King Charles I, he would not take the parliament's, approval, Parliament's suggestion, and he wouldn't consider their opinion at all. And he was an absolutist. That is, he believed in the absolute power of the monarch, and that became the reason of his doom. We are getting to that.
A king who had just agreed to a check on his power. Meanwhile, Puritans who objected to the pomp of Anglicanism with its statues and stained glass and incense resisted the Archbishop of Canterbury named William Laud, who was attempting to bring the Puritans back to Anglican orthodoxy. Puritan critics were tortured, sometimes put into the stocks or whipped. Some had their faces mutilated, as were members of the upper classes who disapproved of the king and his administration. Then left.
So this is how, the Puritans were being persecuted. Their faces were being mutilated. They were being punished terribly. And there was this Archbishop of Canterbury, William Laud, who was trying to bring to the fold, to the Anglican fold, all these Puritans, right? So he was trying to reunite Puritans and Anglicans, which did not go well with the people. And let's see what the history has to tell us.
Stirred up defiance among the Presbyterians in Scotland, whom he also aimed to restore to Anglicanism. He pushed them to adopt a new version of the prayer book of the Anglican Church, and resistance to that was literally riotous.
So remember how in the beginning it was told that King James I, when he was declared the King of England in 1603, he was already a reigning king in Scotland. So what he tried to do, he tried to consolidate, different disparate parts, the British Isles, right? And he wanted to have one uniform system of government and, one uniform system of following religion, which did not go well with people. And the Archbishop of Canterbury, William Laud, what he tried to do in Scotland, especially, he tried to introduce an episcopal system. That is, bishops having the power in church, which was not received well by these Presbyterians, because this was not how, the Presbyterian churches were functioning. So, they saw this as an intrusion and people resented it and they rose into rebellion. So this is something that became a big, it's actually a precursor to the English Civil War.
Women hurled the new prayer books during religious services and provoked their congregations to join them. In fact, the Presbyterian Scots were eventually so enraged that they invaded England. In response, after more than a decade of refusing to summon Parliament, Charles was like, Parliament, can you come back, please? I need your support in declaring war. Like many a ruler, Charles I.
So how religion became, how something that was religious became a political matter. These Scottish people, they were so fed up with whatever Charles I was doing with the churches and the episcopal system and whatever, William Laud was trying to do. He introduced Anglican prayer books into a Presbyterian church. So this was seen as an intrusion, which was not taken well. And these Scottish people had risen into rebellion and they had attacked England.
Thought that warfare, which he undertook on numerous occasions, would make Parliament rally around him and allow him to raise taxes. But that was a big mistake. Instead, the representatives responded by removing Archbishop Laud from power, decreeing that Parliament must meet at least every 3 years, and putting additional roadblocks in Charles's way. When Charles called on soldiers to arrest the members of Parliament who had thwarted his demands, outright civil war erupted. Between 1642 and 1646, those loyal to the king, called Cavaliers, faced off against those loyal to Parliament, called Roundheads, because of their short haircuts. Parliamentary forces raised the New Model Army, led by Oliver Cromwell, and this new army saw opposing religious sects let go of their differences, which allowed them ultimately to capture Charles I and then execute him in 1649.
England, back in that time, it was divided into two people, the Royalists or the Roundheads and the Parliamentarians. So whoever was in support of King Charles I, they were the Roundheads, they were the Royalists, and who opposed King Charles I, they were the Parliamentarians, right? And that the Parliamentarians were led on by Oliver Cromwell, right? And after King Charles I was executed, Oliver Cromwell came into power, and England experienced briefly a period where, Parliament had complete powers and there was no monarch. And that period, it ranges from 1649 to 1660. And that is also referred to as the interregnum. And it is also called the Commonwealth period, right?
You have to remember that during these years, the Little Ice Age was taking its toll. Many people died from famine. Furthermore, between 1625 and 1636, the bubonic plague killed some 45,000 people in London alone. Amid successive bad weather, entire villages disappeared as their inhabitants either died of illness or starvation, or else abandoned their communities in search of food. And all of that enhanced the resistance and criticism of those who found it impossible to pay more taxes, so that Charles could realize his absolutist dreams and fight his wars.
See, already London was experiencing so much because of the Ice Age, because of so much cold, and there was also an onslaught of bubonic plague during that time and famine. So, people were dying. They were out of money. The whole economy had shaken up. And at a time like that, if a monarch is coming up with heavy taxes, imagine how frustrating that must have been for common people, right? The reason why Charles I was very unsuccessful as the king of England, and the reason why he became unpopular with the masses and eventually executed, right?
Higher percentage of Britain's population died in this period than during both World War I and World War II combined. But with the war ended and Charles defeated, England was now a republic, although not quite like contemporary republics, since it was ruled by the increasingly dictatorial Oliver Cromwell. Although, come to think of it, that does make it like some contemporary republics. Cromwell was still the head of the new model army, but without a shared enemy in the king, all those varying sects and religious factions went back to squabbling with each other until Cromwell wiped out those in the new model army who objected to the policies of his Puritan regime. Cromwell's army, for instance, crushed the Catholics in Ireland, whom it was suspected favored a restored monarchy, but even so.
Right, so Oliver Cromwell, he was a Puritan. So this was a time when Puritans had maximum power, right? And this was because Puritans, they were not believers in, a very indulgent lifestyle. They were actually opposed to it. Theaters were shut down. In 1642, when all this upheaval was brewing, which actually resulted in the killing of the regicide of King Charles I. By that time, that time had actually put a full stop to that golden period of drama, which was continuing from Elizabeth I's time, right? So it was during 1642 that theaters were shut down because there was already a lot of criticism going on that it's actually immoral, and such indulgences are not good for from Christian point of view. If you consider the Christian, an ideal Christian life, something that the Puritans idealized, it was not a good thing, right? So theaters were shut down, and with the shutting of theaters, the golden period of drama that was continuing from Elizabethan time, it came to an end, right? And there was this several different sects who were actually against King Charles I. It briefly, they all briefly reunited during Charles I's execution, and later again, differences arose again. And Oliver Cromwell, he was Puritan, and he was trying to crush everybody, every religious sect whom he thought would bring back monarchy into England, right?
So Cromwell could not keep his army or his government unified, despite building a very impressive network of spies. In 1658, after less than a decade in power, Cromwell died, and as civil war once more seemed inevitable, in 1660, Parliament summoned Charles II to the throne.
So when Oliver Cromwell died, he was actually, he was succeeded by his son, who was not a very strong, he could not handle the affairs as strongly as his father did. So the parliament itself, they summoned back the monarch in exile, King Charles II, who was supposed to be on the throne after Charles I. But then briefly, it was the time of republic in England. And they saw that, this republic model is not working fine for England. So they decided to have Charles II back. They had him restored. And from that time, 1616 onwards, the restoration period began, right? So this is what, the history is of English Civil War and how Charles I was executed, right? So this is the video that I will come back to when I am discussing the restoration period as well. Right, but for now, we need to understand this bit, and we will go on to discuss the other things that I have noted down. So Charles I, this is a reiteration of what I have already mentioned. He ruled England, Scotland, and Ireland, Charles I. He believed in divine right. He believed in absolute power of the monarch. And he was married to French Catholic Queen Henrietta Maria, who refused to convert into Anglican faith, right? And that was already the time, England was experiencing a very bad phase in terms of Roman Catholic faith. Why? Because there was this controversy involving James I's death, and the gunpowder plot, which had actually heightened this whole anti-Catholic sentiment. I'm just repeating whatever has been told in the video. So he introduced some very unpopular taxes without the consent of the parliament, and he was opposed by the parliament, King Charles I. Right, he refused to accept Parliament's demands for constitutional monarchy. That monarchy and constitution has to go hand in hand. So what he did not pay to their demands. He did not pay any heed to whatever Parliament was saying, and he did not call the Parliament for 11 years. And that was also the time when Bishops' War broke out. Bishops' War, the same war that I'm referring, that I spoke about. That William Laud, the Archbishop of Canterbury, he tried to introduce Anglican, way of governance in the church, the Scottish church as well, which did not go down well with Scottish people, and they rose into rebellion, right? So the Bishop Wars, which was actually a prelude to the English Civil War, and it were the first of the conflicts that are known collectively as the 1638 to 1651 wars of the Three Kingdoms, which took place in Scotland, England, and Ireland. So this is what the Bishops' War is referred to as Wars of the Three Kingdoms, right? And it was actually two brief campaigns that were fought between Charles I and the Scots. So they were the opposing parties, Charles I versus the Scots. And why were the Scots against Charles I? Because he attempted to impose uniform practices on the kirk. That is kirk is the Scottish word for church. So he tried to make these practices uniform in both England and Scotland, and these were opposed by most Scots who supported a Presbyterian church governed by ministers and elders. Right? They did not want an episcopal system. They did not want bishops to come into this whole system, the church that was being run for so long in Scotland. So the Scots sought support from sympathizers in Ireland and England, chiefly Puritans, who objected to the religious reforms and those who wanted to force Charles I to recall Parliament, suspended since 1629. So it was since 1629 that Parliament was suspended, and whoever was frustrated with Charles I, they joined forces with these Scots, right? And then war broke out, and the First Bishops' War broke out when Charles I attempted to regulate liturgy, the church, in Scotland by imposing Archbishop William Laud's Book of Common Prayer in 1637, right? So that decision did not go well, and people rose against Charles I. The English Civil War broke out, also called the Great Rebellion or the English Rebellion, and it was fought between parliamentarians and the Royalists. Royalists who are also called Roundheads because of their haircut. It looked round, so Roundheads, right? And it was mainly over the manner of England's governance and issues of religious freedom. And the war broke out actually in two phases, from 1642 to 46, and then from 48 to 54. And King Charles I eventually was held in captivity, and he was held in captivity in 1647, and he was put under trial from 20th January 1649. And during that time, he was asked to plead, and he could have been pardoned, but then he did not agree to it. And eventually on the 30th of January 1649, he was executed and he was beheaded, right? And this English Civil War, the execution of Charles I, it had three outcomes. And what was that? The trial and the execution of Charles I, 1649, the exile of his son, Charles II, who will later, who will get restored to the English throne. So he went on an exile, and the replacement of English monarchy with the Commonwealth of England, which from 1653, as the Commonwealth of England, Scotland and Ireland unified the British Isles under the personal rule of Oliver Cromwell, who ruled from 1653 to 1658, and briefly his son Richard Cromwell, 1658 to 1659. And in 1660, because this whole Commonwealth model failed, so the Parliament itself decided to call back Charles II, and it itself, helped in restoring back monarchy to England, right? A little bit about Oliver Cromwell. He was an English general and statesman who was first a subordinate and later commander-in-chief. And he led the armies of Parliament of England against King Charles I during the English Civil War, and subsequently ruling the British Isles as Lord Protector from 1653 until his death in 1658, right? So he was a statesman already, and he was actually born into a landed gentry to a family who had descended from the sister of Henry VIII's minister, Thomas Cromwell. He was a very important minister in Henry VIII's court. Oliver Cromwell, was a descendant of that minister, right? And he became an independent Puritan after undergoing a religious conversion in the 1630s, taking a generally tolerant view towards the many Protestant sects of the time. So even though he was Puritan, he was, very lenient towards other protesting sects sprang up with the Reformation in Christianity. And he entered the English civil wars on the side of the Roundheads or parliamentarians. Sorry, the Royalists are not called Roundheads. The parliamentarians are called Roundheads, right? So the parliaments.
Come on, give you milk. Yeah.
Okay, go to mom.
Raj, can you please mute yourself?
I know my chapter.
Right. So, the Royalists and the Roundheads were actually in oppositions. So the parliaments are the Roundheads. Sorry, there was a little confusion. I think I mixed up the two. And he gained the nickname Old Ironsides. So this was the nickname given to him because of his very strong army that he had came up with. He had very strong military prowess. So all of that, the reason why he was given this nickname. And he was also one of the signatories of Charles I's death warrant in 1649 and dominated the short-lived Commonwealth of England. So he had agreed to the execution of Charles I, right? And now England during that interregnum, that Commonwealth period, how was it like? So it was a period between the execution of Charles I on 30 January 1649 and the arrival of his son Charles II in London on 22nd May 1660, which marked the start of the Restoration. The Puritan views of the majority of Parliament and its supporters began to be imposed on the rest of the country. So like I said, it was under a very strong Puritan control, England during that time. And the Puritans advocated an austere lifestyle, a very simple, austere lifestyle, and restricted what they saw as the excesses of the previous regime. So, they were not in favor of people going to theater. They were not in favor of people celebrating too much, the Christian festivals of Easter and Christmas with too much pomp and show. Excess was not good as per them. And they refrained from such excesses, from such, hedonistic indulgences, right? However, some forms of art that were thought to be virtuous, such as opera, were encouraged. So the theater was not encouraged, but opera was okay. It was allowed, right? And life of the Jews in England improved during this time. in that they could no longer be prosecuted if caught worshipping, yet discrimination continued. So, there was already a lot of anti-Jewish sentiment prevailing during Queen Elizabeth I's time. It is very much evident through the literature. The reason why we have Shakespeare writing the character of Shylock, the reason why we have Marlowe's, Jew of Malta. So, the English Christian population was very much against Jews. But during that interregnum period, Jews, they had a sigh of relief because they were not being prosecuted so badly as in the previous time. But again, the discrimination against them, it continued. So I will stop here today. So this is, a lot for today. I want the details to actually enter your system. So let it, seep into you, right? Try and read more about it in solace. And if there are any questions regarding whatever has been discussed today, the platform is now open for that. Any questions? Anybody? Aparna, I think, no, my bad. I thought you had your hand raised. Any questions thus far? You can type your questions in the chat box as well. I know it can be a lot for a day, but then if you read more about it, you are going to understand what was happening. And there are, a plethora of videos available on YouTube if you want to, understand more about it, if you want to explore more about it. There is also a movie clip that was, I saw a few weeks back on YouTube about how Charles I was executed. And a movie also has been made on this. If you want to go through it, that is completely your choice. But any questions, anything at all from anywhere? No question, but love to hear in spite of other background person. Thank you so much. Mr. Noor Ahmed. Okay, so I think this is it then for today. We will meet again next week, same time, same platform, using the same link. And in case if you have questions, you can post it in the group and I'll answer, I'll get back. Ma'am, could you please repeat movie's name? I don't remember exactly what that name was, but okay, if I find the clip, I will post it in the group for you all to watch, right? It is a very interesting clip. And I will also discuss, I will get back to the details of Charles I's execution when we talk about Andrew Marvell, right? This is coming in the next session. So just hold on to that. And in the meantime, if I find that clip, I will post in the group, right? So, okay, you're most welcome, Ekta. So this is it for today, and I'll see you next week then. Until next time, thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Ash. You are just wonderful. We are learning from you, and you have such a vibration in your voice that keep us, like waiting the next, what is the next?
Thank you so much. It means a lot.
So positive, and you are just shining with a lot of love and light. And this is the beauty of all that. This is why your teaching is very, very interesting.
Thank you so much, Your Highness. I'm very glad to be a part of this initiative. Thank you for having me every time.
Thank you for being in my life.
I should be saying that. Thank you for being in my life. I feel exactly the same. Thank you so much. And this sentiment is actually shared by so many of my students. They're so happy that this platform is being organized, and there are so many students who are actually deriving benefit from this, and they're very happy. So from them all, thank you so much, Your Highness. We're blessed to have.
In the university, it's preparing also their exam, their studies there, and this is good.
Yes, absolutely. They're preparing for some competitive exams in India, and it is also whatever is being discussed on this platform during this session. It is actually very helpful from any exam in English literature. Any examination that is associated to English literature, because you need to have a good footing in the history and an overview of whatever has come in the previous years is actually very helpful for the students in understanding and progressing their preparations, keeping in mind all of that.
Yes. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for being here today with us. And so, yes, we meet next week, next prop, next session, same platform, same link, same.
So that there's no confusion.
Happy birthday to our sister Raja also. And thank you everyone, and have a wonderful and blessed evening, everyone.
Thank you so much, Your Highness. Thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. I'll see you all next week. Bye-bye.